The first time Adelaide Vance touched clean linen. She was 23 years old and convinced she was dying. Blood soaked through the tattered remains of her dress as she stumbled through the dense Colorado forest, each step sending fresh waves of agony through her battered body. The stagecoach robbery had happened so fast. One moment she had been clutching her small carpet bag containing everything she owned in this world, and the next, gunfire had erupted around her. The driver had fallen first, then the guard. The other passengers had surrendered their valuables without resistance, but Adelaide had nothing worth taking except her mother's silver locket. When she had refused to hand it over, one of the bandits had struck her across the face with his pistol. She had fought back, scratching and clawing, and for her defiance, he had shot her. The bullet had torn through her side, missing vital organs but leaving her weak and bleeding. She had managed to escape into the forest while the bandits argued over their meager haul, dragging herself through underbrush and over fallen logs until the sounds of their voices faded into nothing. Now she was alone, lost somewhere in the Rocky Mountains with no idea which direction led to civilization and which led deeper into the wilderness. Her vision blurred as she pressed one hand against the wound, trying to staunch the bleeding. The September afternoon was warm, but she felt cold, so terribly cold. Her foot caught on a root and she fell hard, crying out as pain exploded through her entire body. She could not get up, could not move. The forest floor smelled of pine needles and rich earth, and she thought it was a strange place to die, far from the dusty Texas town where she had been born, far from anything resembling home. She heard footsteps approaching and tried to crawl away, terrified the bandits had tracked her down to finish what they had started. But the steps were too measured, too careful. A shadow fell over her, and she looked up into the face of a man unlike any she had ever seen. He was enormous, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they blocked out the sun filtering through the pine branches above. His hair fell past his shoulders in dark waves, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a striking blue that seemed to see right through her bravado to the terrified woman beneath. He wore buckskin clothing and carried a rifle slung across his back, and for a moment she wondered if he was real or some fever dream conjured by her dying mind. "Easy now," he said, his voice a deep rumble that somehow felt safe. "I am not going to hurt you." He knelt beside her, and she saw his eyes widen as he took in the blood, the bruising already forming on her face, the desperate way she clutched at her side. Without another word, he shrugged off the pack he carried and pulled out a clean cloth, pressing it firmly against her wound. She gasped at the pressure. "I know it hurts," he said quietly, "but we have to stop the bleeding. What is your name?" "Adelaide," she managed through gritted teeth. "Adelaide Vance." "I am Marcus Quinn. Can you tell me what happened?" She told him about the robbery, the words coming in halting gasps between waves of pain. His jaw tightened as he listened, his hands never stopping their efficient work as he examined her injury. "The bullet went clean through," he said finally. "That is good, but you have lost a lot of blood and this needs proper care. My cabin is about 2 miles north. Can you walk if I help you?" She tried to stand, and immediately her legs buckled. Before she could hit the ground again, Marcus caught her, lifting her into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. She wanted to protest, to insist she could manage on her own, but the truth was she could barely keep her eyes open. Instead, she let her head fall against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "Stay with me, Adelaide," he said as he began to walk, his strides long and sure despite the burden he carried. "Keep talking. Tell me where you were headed." "Los Alamos," she whispered. "My aunt lives there. She wrote that she needed help with her boarding house." That is a long way from here. We are closer to Pikes Peak than Los Alamos. I have never been to Colorado before. Everything is so green, so many trees. Where are you from? Texas, near Austin. My father had a small farm. She paused, fighting against the darkness creeping in at the edges of her vision. He died last winter. Fever took him. My mother passed when I was young. I am sorry. The words were simple but sincere, and something in his tone made her believe he truly understood loss. She wanted to ask him more, to learn about this strange mountain man who had appeared when she needed help most, but the effort of speaking was too much. She let herself drift, trusting this stranger in a way that made no logical sense but felt right nonetheless. When she woke, she was lying on something soft. Her eyes flew open, and she found herself staring at rough wooden beams crossing a ceiling. The air smelled of wood smoke and something cooking, and for a moment she could not remember where she was or how she had gotten there. Then the pain in her side reminded her, and she tried to sit up. Do not move too quickly. Marcus appeared at her side, gently pressing her back down. I cleaned and bandaged the wound, but you need to rest. She looked around and realized she was in a bed, a real bed with a frame and a mattress. But what struck her most was the feeling of the sheets beneath her. They were clean, truly clean, smelling of fresh air and sunshine rather than the mustiness and grime she had known all her life. Growing up, her family had been too poor to own more than 2 threadbare blankets that were never washed. The boarding houses she had stayed in during her journey west had been little better, with stained, dingy bedding that she had tried not to think about too much. The sheets, she said, her voice breaking. They are so clean. Something shifted in Marcus's expression, a softening around his eyes. I wash them every week, he said. I will make sure they stay fresh for you. She did not understand why that simple statement made her eyes fill with tears, but suddenly she was crying, great heaving sobs that made her injury throb but which she could not stop. All the fear and pain and loneliness of the past months came pouring out, and through it all, Marcus sat beside her, one large hand gently holding hers, saying nothing but offering a steady presence that anchored her. When the tears finally subsided, she felt hollow but somehow lighter. Marcus brought her water and helped her drink, then offered her a bowl of stew that smelled divine. I am not much of a cook, he admitted, but it will give you strength. The stew was actually quite good, rich with venison and root vegetables. She ate slowly, aware of his eyes on her, and found herself studying him in return. Now that she was no longer dying, she could appreciate the sheer physicality of him. His arms, visible where he had rolled up his sleeves, were corded with muscle, and his hands, though gentle when they touched her, looked strong enough to snap a man's neck. Everything about him spoke of power held in check, of strength tempered by control. How long have you lived up here? She asked. 5 years. I came to Colorado after the war. You fought for the Union. Saw things no man should see, did things I wish I could forget. He looked away, his jaw tight. When it was over, I could not go back to cities, to crowds and noise. I needed silence, space, so I came here. It must be lonely. It was. He met her eyes again. It is, but it is also peaceful. No one telling me what to do, where to go, just me and the mountains. And now me, she said softly, and now you. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Though you were not exactly part of my plan. I apologize for bleeding all over your forest. He laughed then, a rich sound that filled the cabin and made something warm unfurl in her chest. You are forgiven. Though I should warn you, recovery is going to take some time. You are welcome to stay as long as you need. I cannot impose on you like that. You are not imposing. Truth is, it might be nice to have someone to talk to besides the chipmunks. Over the following days, Adelaide learned the rhythms of Marcus's life. He rose before dawn, checked his trap lines, hunted or fished depending on the day. He tended a small garden behind the cabin, maintained his equipment with meticulous care, and chopped enough wood to see him through the coming winter. Everything he did was purposeful, efficient, the movements of a man who had learned to rely only on himself. And every Sunday, without fail, he washed the sheets. The first time Adelaide was strong enough to get out of bed, he insisted she sit outside in the sunshine while he stripped the linens and hauled them down to the creek that ran past the cabin. She watched from a wooden chair, her side still aching but healing well, as he scrubbed the fabric clean in the cold mountain water, then hung them to dry on a line strung between two pine trees. "You really do this every week," she called out. "I told you I would keep them fresh." He straightened, water dripping from his hands. A promise is a promise. Something in his tone made her chest tighten. She had known this man less than a week, yet she felt safer with him than she had with anyone in her entire life. It was not just his size or his obvious capability, though those things certainly factored in. It was the way he looked at her, really looked at her as if she mattered, as if her comfort and well-being were important to him. As she grew stronger, she began to help around the cabin. It started small, mending a tear in one of his shirts, preparing vegetables for their meals. Marcus protested at first, insisting she needed to rest, but Adelaide was not accustomed to idleness. Back in Texas, she had worked from dawn to dusk, cooking and cleaning and helping her father with the farm. Sitting still made her feel useless. "At least let me earn my keep," she argued. "You have done so much for me. Let me do something in return." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but if you start hurting, you tell me immediately." She agreed, and soon they fell into an easy partnership. She cooked while he hunted, cleaned while he worked outside. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk, sharing stories of their lives. She learned that he had grown up in Pennsylvania, the youngest of 4 brothers. His family had owned a mill, and he had been expected to take over the business, but the war had changed everything. 2 of his brothers had died at Gettysburg. The third had lost an arm and could barely look at Marcus without resentment. His parents had passed within a year of each other, leaving Marcus adrift and unable to settle back into the life he had left behind. "I tried," he said one night, staring into the flames. "I really did. But everywhere I went, I saw their faces. The men I had killed, the friends I had lost. The mountains were the only place I could breathe." Adelaide reached out and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I understand. After my father died, I could not stay in that house. Every room held memories that cut like knives. I had to leave to find somewhere new. Do you regret it, setting out on your own?" "I regret getting shot," she said with a small smile. "But I do not regret leaving, and I certainly do not regret ending up here." His fingers tightened around hers. "Neither do I." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with an awareness that had been building since the day they met. Adelaide had never been courted, never had time for romance when survival took all her energy. But sitting here with Marcus, feeling the warmth of his hand in hers, she found herself wanting things she had never let herself want before. As September gave way to October, the aspen trees turned gold and the nights grew cold. Marcus insisted Adelaide take the bed while he slept on a pallet near the fire, and no amount of arguing could change his mind. But she found herself lying awake, listening to the sound of his breathing, wishing she had the courage to ask him to join her. The morning she woke to find the world blanketed in the season's first snow. She heard Marcus humming as he prepared breakfast. She dressed carefully, still moving slowly to protect her healing side, and emerged from the sleeping area to find him standing at the stove, flipping flapjacks. "Good morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder. His eyes lit up when he saw her, and she felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Much better." She moved to stand beside him, drawn by the smell of coffee and the simple pleasure of his nearness. "Marcus, I have been thinking. I should probably send word to my aunt. She will be worried when I do not arrive." His expression shuddered, the light fading from his eyes. "Of course. I can ride into town tomorrow, post a letter for you." "Thank you." She paused, gathering her courage. "I was also thinking that maybe when I am fully healed I should stay." He went very still, the spatula frozen in his hand. "Stay here, if you would have me. I know this is your home, your sanctuary, and I would never want to intrude, but these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. I feel like I belong here, like I belong with you." He set down the spatula and turned to face her fully, his large hands coming up to frame her face with a gentleness that belied their strength. "Adelaide, I have been trying to figure out how to ask you to stay since the moment you started getting better. I know it is selfish. You deserve a real life in a real town, not isolation on a mountain with a broken man." "You are not broken," she said fiercely. "You are kind and strong and good. And I do not want a town. I want this. I want you. Are you sure? Winter up here is hard. We might be snowed in for weeks at a time. There are dangers, mountain lions and bears. It is a rough life. I have never had anything but a rough life. At least here I would have you to share it with." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, tracing the line of the scar left by the bandit's pistol. "I cannot offer you much. I have this cabin and my traps, but no real money, no prospects. I do not need prospects. I need clean sheets and a man who washes them just to see me smile." Something broke in his expression then, and he lowered his head to capture her lips with his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if he feared she might shatter. But Adelaide pressed closer, her arms winding around his neck, and the kiss deepened, became something hungry and desperate. He pulled her against him, careful of her injury but unable to hide the tremor in his hands or the rapid beat of his heart. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you," he whispered. "I did not think I was capable of feeling this way anymore, but you have brought something back to life in me that I thought the war had killed." "I love you too," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I have never said those words to anyone before, but I love you, Marcus Quinn." He kissed her again, then picked her up and spun her around, making her laugh despite the twinge in her side. When he set her down, they were both grinning like fools. "We should probably get married," he said, his tone both serious and amused. "I know we have not known each other long, but I do not want there to be any question about this, about us. Are you proposing?" "I suppose I am, though I should probably do it properly." To her shock, he dropped to one knee, still holding both her hands in his. "Adelaide Vance, you stumbled into my life bleeding and broken, and somehow you healed something in me I did not even know needed healing. Will you marry me? Will you stay here and build a life with me for however long we are given?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." They rode into the nearest town 2 days later, a small settlement called Fairplay about 15 miles from Marcus's cabin. The justice of the peace married them in a ceremony that lasted less than 10 minutes, with the shopkeeper and his wife serving as witnesses. Adelaide wore the only dress she owned that was not torn or blood-stained, a simple blue cotton that Marcus said brought out the color of her eyes. He bought her a plain gold band from the general store, slipping it onto her finger with hands that shook slightly. "I wish I could give you more," he said as they rode back toward the cabin, Adelaide seated in front of him on his large bay gelding. A real wedding, a real celebration. This was perfect, she assured him, leaning back against his chest. Everything I needed. That night, They consummated their marriage in the bed with the clean sheets, and Adelaide discovered that she had been wrong about what happiness felt like. Every moment before this had been leading her here, to this man, to this life. Marcus was gentle and patient, taking his time despite his obvious desire, making sure she felt only pleasure. Afterward, they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, listening to the wind howl outside while the fire kept them warm. "I used to think I would die alone up here," Marcus said quietly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "I had made my peace with it, but now I cannot imagine my life without you in it. You will never be alone again," she promised. "We are bound together now for better or worse." "Definitely for better," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Winter came on fast and hard that year. By mid-November, snow lay 3 feet deep around the cabin, and the temperature rarely climbed above freezing. Adelaide learned to snowshoe, to read the signs that warned of coming storms, to make soap and candles and 100 other things necessary for survival. Marcus taught her to shoot, insisting she needed to be able to protect herself if something happened to him. She proved to be a natural shot, much to his surprise and pride. They were snowed in for 2 weeks in December, unable to leave the cabin as blizzard after blizzard pounded the mountains. But Adelaide did not mind. She had Marcus, and books he had collected over the years, and the simple joy of waking each morning in clean sheets beside the man she loved. They made love frequently, unable to keep their hands off each other, learning what brought pleasure and what brought gasps and cries that echoed off the cabin walls on Christmas morning. Marcus surprised her with a gift, a beautifully carved wooden box. "Open it," he urged, watching her with barely contained excitement. Inside was a new dress, this one made of soft green wool, along with a warm cloak lined with rabbit fur. But what made her cry was what lay beneath the clothing, a small wooden carving of 2 figures, a man and a woman standing hand in hand. "I made it," he said, suddenly shy. "I know it is not much, but I wanted you to have something to remember our first Christmas together." "It is perfect," she said, throwing her arms around him. "You are perfect." "Hardly," he said with a laugh, "but I am yours." "Always," she whispered against his lips. The winter finally broke in early March, the snow beginning to melt and reveal the world beneath. Adelaide discovered she was pregnant in April, when her monthly courses failed to arrive, and she found herself unable to keep down breakfast for 3 mornings in a row. Marcus was beside himself with joy and terror in equal measure. What if something goes wrong? He fretted, hovering over her as she tried to clean up after their midday meal. "You should be resting. Let me do that." "Marcus, I am pregnant, not dying. Women work right up until their time comes. I am not going to break. But you were shot just last year. What if your body is not strong enough?" She took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "I am strong enough. We both are. Now stop worrying and let me live my life." But she could not help feeling touched by his concern, even when it bordered on obsessive. He insisted on doing all the heavy work, refused to let her chop wood or haul water. He hunted extra game and made sure she ate plenty of meat, determined that their child would have everything it needed to grow strong. As her belly began to swell, Marcus would lie beside her in bed at night, his large hand splayed across her stomach, feeling for movement. When the baby finally kicked for the first time in July, his eyes filled with tears. "I felt that," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Our child is really in there." "Where else would it be?" she teased. I know, but feeling it kick makes it real in a way it was not before." He pressed a kiss to her stomach. "Hello in there, I am your father and I love you so much already." Adelaide ran her fingers through his hair, marveling at how this fierce mountain man could be so tender. You are going to be a wonderful father. I hope so. I want to give our child everything I never had: safety, love, a home where they know they belong. They will have all that and more, she assured him. The baby came in early November, arriving with the first major snowstorm of the season. Adelaide labored for 18 hours while Marcus paced and fretted, feeling utterly helpless. She had insisted she did not need a midwife, that women had been giving birth without help for thousands of years, but now he cursed himself for listening to her. What if something went wrong? What if he lost her? But Adelaide was stronger than either of them had realized. When the baby finally crowned, she bore down with all her strength, and Marcus caught his son as he entered the world, a squalling, red-faced miracle. "A boy," he said, his voice breaking. "We have a son." He cleaned the baby and cut the cord with shaking hands, then placed the infant in Adelaide's arms. She was exhausted, covered in sweat and trembling from the effort, but her face glowed as she gazed down at their child. "He has your eyes," she whispered. "Look at that blue." "And your nose," Marcus said, settling beside her on the bed. "He is perfect. You are perfect." They named him Matthew after Marcus's father. He was a healthy baby with strong lungs and an insatiable appetite. Marcus proved to be as devoted a father as Adelaide had predicted, walking the floor with Matthew when he fussed at night, changing his diapers without complaint, staring at him for hours as if unable to believe he was real. "I never knew I could feel this way," he told Adelaide one night as they watched their son sleep in the cradle Marcus had built. "Like my heart is walking around outside my body, like I would die to protect him." "That is what love does," she said, leaning against his shoulder. "It makes us vulnerable but also stronger than we ever thought possible." As Matthew grew, the cabin began to feel smaller. Marcus decided to build an addition, creating a separate bedroom so they would have more space. Adelaide helped when she could, holding boards steady while he hammered, handing him tools. They worked well together, anticipating each other's needs without words. By the time Matthew was walking, the addition was complete. They moved their bed into the new room, and Adelaide hung curtains she had sewn from fabric Marcus had brought back from town. It felt like a real home now, lived in and loved. Marcus continued to wash the sheets every week, a ritual that had become sacred to them both. Matthew would sometimes help, his chubby hands splashing in the creek water while Marcus scrubbed. Adelaide would watch from the porch, her hand resting on her stomach where their second child grew, and feel a contentment so profound it sometimes frightened her. She had never imagined she could have this, a family and a home and a man who loved her so completely. Their second child, a daughter they named Amy, arrived in the spring of Matthew's second year. She was smaller than her brother had been, but no less fierce, making her presence known with lusty cries that echoed through the cabin. Marcus was smitten from the first moment, holding her tiny body with infinite care. "I did not think I could love anything as much as I love you and Matthew," he told Adelaide, "but I was wrong." She smiled, exhausted but happy. "The heart just keeps growing to make room." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Matthew grew into a curious, active boy who followed his father everywhere, wanting to learn everything. Amy was quieter but determined, refusing to be left behind just because she was smaller. Marcus taught them both about the forest, how to read tracks and identify plants, which berries were safe to eat and which would make them sick. Adelaide taught them letters and numbers, using books Marcus bought on his trips to town. She told them stories of her childhood in Texas, of their grandfather who had farmed despite the harsh land, of their grandmother who had died too young but had loved deeply. Marcus shared his own stories, though he left out the worst of the war, focusing instead on the funny moments, The bonds between soldiers, the small kindnesses that had kept him human. On Sundays, Marcus still washed the sheets. It had become more than just a chore. It was his way of showing Adelaide that he remembered where they had started, that he understood what those clean sheets had meant to a woman who had never known such simple comfort. Sometimes she would help him, and they would work side by side while the children played nearby, their laughter mixing with the sound of running water. When Matthew was 5 and Amy was 3, a group of prospectors showed up near their cabin, drawn by rumors of gold in the creek beds. Marcus was polite but firm, making it clear that this was his land and they needed to move on. Most did, but a few tried to stake claims anyway, setting up camps and panning the streams. Adelaide worried about the intrusion, about what it might mean for their peaceful existence. Marcus shared her concern but tried not to show it, not wanting to frighten the children. He kept his rifle closer at hand and made sure the cabin door was always barred at night. One afternoon, one of the prospectors came to the cabin asking for food. He was young, maybe 20, and looked half-starved. Adelaide's heart went out to him despite her wariness, and she insisted on giving him a meal. Marcus was less charitable, his protective instincts on high alert, but he allowed it. "Thank you, madam," the young man said, wolfing down the stew she offered. "I have not eaten in 2 days." "Why are you out here?" Marcus asked, his tone gruff. "This is no place for someone who does not know what they are doing. Heard there was gold. Thought I could make my fortune." The prospector laughed bitterly. "But I have found nothing but rock and freezing water. Lost most of my supplies crossing a river that was running higher than I expected." "Gold fever makes fools of men," Marcus said, but his expression had softened slightly. "Where are you from?" "Ohio." "Had a farm with my brother, but it failed. Thought this would be a fresh start." Adelaide and Marcus exchanged a look. They both understood desperation, the need to escape a life that had become unbearable. "There is no gold here," Marcus said finally. "Trust me, I have been living on this mountain for years. If there was gold, I would have found it. You are wasting your time." The prospector's shoulders slumped. "I was afraid of that, but I do not have enough money to get back home. I spent everything getting here. Can you work?" Adelaide asked. Marcus looked at her in surprise, but she pressed on. "We could use help clearing more land for a bigger garden, and the roof on the old section of the cabin needs repairs before winter." "I can work," the prospector said eagerly. "I am not afraid of hard labor." So they hired him, this desperate young man named Timothy, paying him in meals and a place to sleep in the small shed Marcus used for storage. He proved to be a decent worker, willing and strong despite his recent hardships. Marcus taught him what he knew about surviving in the mountains, and gradually Timothy's gaunt frame filled out and his eyes lost their haunted look. By the time autumn arrived, Timothy had saved enough from the small wages Marcus paid him to afford passage back to Ohio. He left with tears in his eyes, thanking them profusely for their kindness. "You saved my life," he said, shaking Marcus's hand. "I will never forget what you did for me." After he left, Adelaide leaned against Marcus, watching the trail where Timothy had disappeared. "Do you think he will be all right?" "I think he has a better chance now than he did before. We gave him that much at least." "You are a good man, Marcus Quinn." He kissed the top of her head. "I try to be, mostly because you make me want to be better." The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Matthew grew tall and strong like his father, with the same blue eyes and dark hair. Amy developed her mother's quick wit and determination, refusing to let her brother or anyone else tell her what she could and could not do. They added a third child, another boy named Michael, who arrived when Matthew was 7 and proved to be the most easygoing of the three. The cabin expanded again to accommodate their growing family. Marcus built a loft for the boys and a small room off the main living area for Amy. He crafted furniture with his own hands, each piece made with care and attention to detail. Adelaide sewed curtains and quilts, planted flowers around the cabin in the spring, created a home that was beautiful as well as functional. They were not wealthy by any measure, but they had everything they needed. The garden provided vegetables, Marcus's hunting provided meat, and Adelaide had learned to preserve and store enough to see them through even the harshest winters. They made soap and candles, tanned hides for clothing and blankets, lived off the land in a way that felt deeply satisfying. And every Sunday, without fail, Marcus washed the sheets. The children grew accustomed to this ritual, sometimes helping, sometimes just watching. One day, when Matthew was about 10, he asked his father why he was so particular about it. Marcus looked at Adelaide, who was sitting on the porch with baby Michael on her lap, and smiled. "Because the first time your mother slept in a bed with clean sheets," she cried, "and I decided right then that I would make sure she always had that comfort, no matter what." Matthew considered this seriously. "Mother, why had you never slept in clean sheets before?" Adelaide set Michael down and came to stand beside her oldest son. "Because I grew up very poor and we did not have the means for such things. Your father gave me something I never knew I could have, and he continues to give it to me every week." "That is love, son," Marcus said, draping an arm around Adelaide's shoulders. "Real love is not just pretty words or grand gestures. It is showing up, day after day, and doing the small things that make the other person's life better." Matthew nodded, tucking this information away. Adelaide knew he would remember it, would carry it with him as he grew into a man and eventually loved someone of his own. When Adelaide was 40 and Marcus 42, they decided their family was complete. 3 healthy children seemed like more blessing than either of them had expected, and they were content with what they had built. The cabin was paid for, such as it was, and they had established relationships with several families in Fairplay, trading goods and occasionally joining them for social gatherings. But mostly they kept to themselves, preferring the peace of their mountain to the bustle of town life. They had created something rare and precious, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. They still made love regularly, their passion for each other undimmed by the years. Adelaide would sometimes catch Marcus watching her as she cooked or worked in the garden, his eyes full of an emotion that made her heart skip a beat. "What are you looking at?" she would ask, though she knew the answer. "You," he would reply simply. "Always you." The children grew and eventually began to leave. Matthew, at 18, decided he wanted to try his hand at ranching and hired on with a spread near Pueblo. It broke Adelaide's heart to see him go, but she understood his need to find his own way. Marcus gave him his blessing and a fine horse he had been training, along with advice about working hard and treating people fairly. Amy, at 16, surprised them by announcing she wanted to become a teacher. She had always loved learning, often reading by lamplight late into the night. Adelaide helped her apply to a teaching college in Denver, and when Amy was accepted, they both cried, holding each other tight. "I am so proud of you," Adelaide whispered. "You are going to do wonderful things." "I learned from the best," Amy said. "You taught me that women can be strong and smart and independent, that we do not have to wait for permission to chase our dreams." Michael, the youngest, showed no signs of wanting to leave. He loved the mountain as much as his father did, found peace in the solitude and beauty of the wilderness. Marcus began teaching him everything he knew about trapping and hunting, about reading weather patterns and respecting the land. Adelaide suspected Michael would build his own cabin eventually, somewhere nearby, and raise his own family in these mountains. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Marcus surprised Adelaide by taking her back to Fairplay, to the same general store where he had bought her wedding ring. This time, he purchased a second ring, this one studded with small sapphires that matched her eyes. "I should have given you this years ago," he said as he slipped it onto her finger. "You deserve beautiful things." "I have beautiful things," she said, gesturing to encompass not just the ring but everything around them. "I have you, I have our children, I have a life I never dreamed possible." "Still," he insisted, "I want you to have this, a reminder of how much you mean to me." That night they made love with the same passion as always, their bodies fitting together as perfectly as they had 20 years ago. Afterward, Adelaide traced the scars on Marcus's chest, old wounds from the war that had never fully faded. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Choosing this life, choosing me?" He caught her hand and pressed it over his heart. "Not for a single second." "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Adelaide Quinn. You and our children gave me a reason to live again." "You saved me," she said softly. "I was dying in that forest in more ways than one, and you carried me home." "We saved each other," he corrected. "That is what love does." The years continued their steady march. Matthew married a rancher's daughter and gave them 2 grandchildren. Amy finished her education and took a teaching position in a small mountain town, making a difference in the lives of children who would otherwise have had no schooling. Michael, as Adelaide had predicted, built a cabin about a mile from theirs and married a quiet girl from Fairplay who loved the mountains as much as he did. Marcus and Adelaide grew older, their bodies showing the wear of hard living and harsh winters. Marcus's hair went gray, then white, though he remained as strong as ever. Adelaide developed arthritis in her hands, making sewing difficult though she refused to give up her quilting. They moved a little slower, tired a little faster, but their love remained constant. And every Sunday, Marcus washed the sheets. Even when his joints ached and his back protested, he would gather up the linens and carry them down to the creek. Adelaide would sometimes accompany him, sitting on a sun-warmed rock and watching as he worked. They did not need to talk much anymore. After so many years together, they could communicate with looks and small gestures. On a warm September afternoon, almost 30 years to the day after they had first met, Adelaide sat on the porch and watched Marcus hang the freshly washed sheets on the line. The aspens were just beginning to turn gold, and the air smelled of autumn, of change and endings and new beginnings all at once. Marcus finished his task and came to sit beside her, his large frame settling onto the wooden bench he had built when Matthew was still a baby. He took her hand, threading their fingers together the way he had done 1,000 times before. "You remember the first time I brought you here?" he asked. "I remember thinking I was dying," she said with a small smile. "I remember looking up and seeing this enormous man standing over me and feeling safe for the first time in my life. I took one look at you, bleeding and broken and still fighting, and I knew my life was about to change. Did you know you would love me?" "Not right away," he admitted. "But by the time you had been here a week, I could not imagine my life without you in it. And every day since has only confirmed what I knew then. You were meant to be mine, and I was meant to be yours." She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "I have been so happy here, happier than I ever thought possible." "Me too," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Me too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sheets dance in the breeze, listening to the creek burble and the birds call to each other in the pines. This was their life, simple and uncomplicated, built on love and commitment and the determination to care for each other every single day. Inside the cabin, The bed waited with its clean sheets, fresh and sweet-smelling, ready to cradle them through another night. It was a small thing, washing linens, but it had become the symbol of everything they were to each other. Marcus kept his promise, week after week, year after year, making sure Adelaide always had that comfort she had been denied for so much of her life. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber, Marcus helped Adelaide to her feet and they walked inside together. He built up the fire while she prepared their supper, moving around each other in the familiar dance of long marriage. They ate, washed the dishes, banked the fire for the night, and when they finally climbed into bed, sliding between those clean sheets that smelled of sunshine and mountain air, Adelaide turned to Marcus and kissed him softly. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For everything. For saving me, for loving me, for washing the sheets." He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "It is the least I could do for the woman who gave me back my life." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms the way they had almost every night for 3 decades. Outside, the wind picked up and the aspens rustled, their golden leaves shimmering in the moonlight. The mountains stood eternal, witnessing this love story that had unfolded in their shadow, this testament to the power of small acts of devotion. Marcus and Adelaide would have many more years together, watching grandchildren grow and meeting great-grandchildren, celebrating anniversaries and mourning losses, facing whatever challenges life brought with the same partnership that had sustained them from the beginning. But through it all, one thing remained constant. Every Sunday, Marcus washed the sheets, making sure the woman he loved always had clean linens to sleep on, always had that small comfort that had once moved her to tears. It was his way of saying "I love you" without words, his way of honoring the scared, wounded woman who had stumbled into his life and changed everything. And every Sunday, Adelaide smiled, remembering that first night in his cabin when she had touched clean sheets for the first time in her life, never imagining that this simple kindness was the beginning of a love story that would last a lifetime. She had never slept in a bed with clean sheets before Marcus, and she would never take it for granted, because real love, she had learned, was not about grand romantic gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about showing up every day, doing the work, caring for each other through the mundane and the extraordinary alike. It was about a mountain man who carried a wounded woman through the forest and then spent the rest of his life making sure she never felt unsafe or unloved again. It was about clean sheets, washed weekly, a promise kept decade after decade. It was about 2 people who found each other against all odds and chose, every single day, to keep choosing each other. That was love in its truest, most enduring form. And as Adelaide drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, surrounded by the scent of fresh linens and wood smoke, she knew with absolute certainty that she had lived a life worth living. She had been loved completely by a good man, had raised children who would carry that love forward into the world, had built something beautiful and lasting in these wild Colorado mountains. She had never slept in a bed with clean sheets until Marcus Quinn, and now she could not imagine sleeping any other way. He had given her not just comfort but dignity, not just shelter but a home, not just companionship but a partnership that had sustained them through 3 decades of joy and hardship. The mountain man had washed her sheets weekly just to see her smile, and in doing so, he had taught her what it meant to be truly, deeply loved.